Good morning. Welcome to the 6th lecture of the OUSL Distinguished Lecture Series. My name is Ishana Bewardana. I'm the Director of the International Academic Relations Division here at the Open University of Sri Lanka. Today we have a very special speaker with us, Professor Rohan Samarajiva, who is the founding chair of Learn Asia, which is a think tank based here in Sri Lanka, but serving the wider Asian community. Without further ado, I would now like to invite Professor Pallevatta, the Head of Department of Civil Engineering here at OUSL, to chair this session and the lecture by Professor Rohan Samarajiva. Professor Pallevatta.
Good morning to all of you. As a preamble, I would like to introduce Professor Samarajiva. Professor Rohan Samarajiva is founding chair of Learn Asia, an ICT policy and regulation think tank active across emerging Asia. He was CEO from 2004 to end 2012. His most recent co-authored book is Information Lives of the Poor, Fighting Poverty with Technology, published in 2013 in English, French, Myanmar and Spanish. Samarajiva was a team leader at the Sri Lanka Ministry of Economic Reform, Science and Technology, 2002-2004, responsible for infrastructure reforms, including participation in the design of the $83 million e-Sri Lanka initiative. He was Director General of Telecommunications in Sri Lanka, 1998 to 1999, a founder director of the ICT Agency of Sri Lanka, 2003 to 2005, honorary professor at the University of Moratuwa in Sri Lanka, 2003 to 2004. Visiting Professor of Economics of Infrastructure at the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands, 2000 to 2003, and Associate Professor of Communications and Public Policy at the Ohio State University in the US, 1987 to 2000, where he also served as Chair of Graduate Studies for multiple terms. Samarajiva was Policy Advisor to the Ministry of Post and Telecommunication in Bangladesh from 2006 to 2009. Samarajiva also has over 15 years of graduate and undergraduate teaching experience at the Ohio State University, the University of Pennsylvania, the Delft University of Technology, and the University of Moratuwa on policy, economics, regulation, and communication. His commitment to and accomplishments in teaching were recognized. Election as Faculty Member of the Year at the Ohio State University of School of Communication in 1997, 98, 1989, 90, and 1988, 89 by the vote of graduate students. He was invited to the World Innovation Summit on Education, WISE 2013 and WISE 2014 in Doha, Qatar. Samarajiva is a board member of Communication Policy Research South, an initiative to identify and foster policy intellectuals in emerging Africa and Asia. He serves on the editorial boards of 5 academic journals. He also co-founded the journal New Media and Society, published by Sagi. Samarajiva was shortlisted one of 3 for the 2009 Bastiat Prize for Online Journalism for his choices column in Lanka Business Online. The communication research as an agent of change was given to him by the International Communication Association in the same year. He was elected board member at large of the International Communication Association of 2009 to 2011. The Simon Fraser University in Canada awarded him multiple graduate research fellowships, open graduate scholarships and the Steel Memorial Graduate Scholarship for the 1981-85 period. At the Sri Lanka Law College, he was awarded the first scholarship at the Attorney's Preliminary Examination and prizes in Roman law and criminal law. He served as advisor to the Peace and Social Justice Division of the Ford Foundation, New York City in 2001-2002, and as a member of the Advisory Committee on Program on Information Technology and International Cooperation and Security of Social Science Research Council, New York in 2000-2002. Further, he serves as senior advisor to Sarvodaya on ICT matters and on the steering committee on infrastructure development of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. He is a member of the board and former chair of the Lanka Software Foundation and board member of Research ICT Africa. He was a member of the Intergovernmental Joint Study Group on the India-Sri Lanka Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement 2003 and chaired at the GATS Advisory Committee of the Department of Commerce, Sri Lanka 2002 to 2004. Samarajiva chaired the first annual Telecoms Regulatory Affairs Forum in Singapore in 2013, the first Digital Opportunity Forum in Seoul in 2006, and the expert workshop on fixed mobile interconnection in Geneva for the International Communication Union in 2000. He is regularly invited to moderate ministerial and other panels at ITU and GSM Association events. So with this long introduction, I am sure you have a very good understanding of the capacity of Professor Samarajiva, and I would like to invite him to chair this, to conduct this session. Professor Samarajiva.
Thank you, Professor Pallavatta. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about something that I cared very deeply about, particularly given my dual roles or triple roles, being in government, spending most of my life in university settings, and now running a think tank which does university-like things, but outside the university. The tragedy, I think, of our times is that the universities have become irrelevant. And I don't think this is something that I can prove mathematically, but I can give you two pieces of evidence that are supportive of this. One from a leading politician of our time, Honorable Narendra Modi, Prime Minister of India, who talks about inadequate critical inputs to policy making, not only from universities but also from think tanks, and from Nicholas Kristof, who's a columnist for the New York Times in a developing country. So the first one is from a developing country, and the second quote is from a developed country, where Kristof says some of the smartest thinkers on problems are university professors, but most of them just don't matter in today's great debates. So let's see whether this holds for our context. Maybe this is not true in Sri Lanka. And so these are the topics that I plan to cover, which is to look at the question in terms of three cases in Sri Lanka, looking at the university's overall structure to see whether the university is capable of doing it, and possible solutions. When we look at this subject of policy relevance, how ideas or research ideas can influence policy, I have found this particular schema developed by Professor Lindquist of the University of Victoria in Canada to be of value. So affecting policy regimes is the one that is easiest to think about, and that's the one that I'll spend quite a bit of time on. That is where in a relatively short period of time you get ideas, suggestions, recommendations, research, changing the way a particular policy or a law or a way of doing things, either in government or in the private sector, changing very quickly. The other two are a little more complicated and take a little bit more time, and if I may, I will move on to the next slide. So the broadening policy horizons is that people, the decision makers, either in the public sector or in the private sector, start asking different questions. In the first one, they simply get different answers. Here they start asking different questions. In the case of expanding policy capacities, they actually become more capable. And I think there's a huge role that universities can and have played in that, and I will discuss that in that context. However, this is a little more difficult to measure, and it takes a longer time. So let's look at the question of direct influence. Direct influence on policy debates. So I'm going to take 3 examples from Sri Lanka. There's no particular scientific basis to these 3 examples. These are issues that I have been involved in, that I know about. They are in the social sciences, humanities, law space. I will make very brief reference to some of the key contributions made, I think perhaps more important contributions made by those in engineering and medicine as I go on. But as I say, if there are people who want to disagree with me, I'm open to a discussion here. So the 3 issues are the current ongoing constitutional reforms, the current debate on right to information, the right to information bill, and the other one is also a current debate, even though it started in 2010, which is about trade agreements, trade relations with important countries in Asia. So let's take the first one. Constitutional reforms. This is a very important issue. I think I don't have to persuade a Sri Lankan audience that this is an important issue. The important thing here is that there is a relatively short policy window. If these things are not done very quickly, it is unlikely that they will get done because it requires a 2/3 majority, and for various unique circumstances, we have a 2/3 majority, at least a promise of a 2/3 majority right now. So this includes reductions in the power of the presidency, restoration of good governance provisions in the form of various commissions that were in the 17th Amendment, and reforms in the way members of parliament are elected. So if you look back at constitutional history, you could say we've had 3 constitutions. The Salisbury Constitution of 1948-47. There was clearly a massive contribution from the university in the form of Sir Ivor Jennings, who was seen to have basically written the document. He was also the Vice Chancellor, the founding Vice Chancellor of the University of Peradeniya. I haven't dug through to see whether there were other people involved, but I think this is quite common knowledge that Ivor Jennings was even seen as a constitutional expert in his own country, but he wrote the Sri Lankan Constitution. In 1972, it was a person with a PhD in history and a leading lawyer, Dr. Colvinard Silva, who was seen as the author of the 72 Constitution, along with the then Prime Minister, Mrs. Bandaranaike. In 1978, this one is less known. It is known that Professor A.J. Wilson, who is of Sri Lankan origin and who was teaching in Canada at the University of New Brunswick, was a major influence on the constitution that was basically designed by Mr. J.R. Jayawardena. Today, do we have such a person? The only name that really jumps out is that of Dr. Jayampati Wickramaratne, who is, by the way, qualified in chemistry and law, to some extent mirroring my background, which is started in engineering and science and then ended up in all these other things. So he is one of the 3 drafters of the 19th Amendment, but he is not associated with the university at all. This particular thing, electoral reforms, is the one that I've been most involved in. This was looked at by a parliamentary select committee from 2003, and the current dean of the Faculty of Science at University of Sri Jayawardenepura, Professor Sudanta Liyanage, served as advisor to the select committee from 2003 or 2004. Today's discussions are strongly influenced by, which involve centrally the Commission of Elections, influenced by Dr. Sujatha Gamage, who happens to be my wife, and Dr. Vigneswaran, who's got a PhD in chemical engineering from the outside. We have Professor Laksiti Fernando, who's retired from the University of Colombo in the social sciences, Asoka Obesekara, who's with a think tank called Verite Research, and myself. So these are the kinds of things that we've done. This was very early in the process. 15th of February, I laid out the fact that this was a practical issue, that this could be done, and then the other people came in. Now you can, well, I'll come to the conclusion on these things, but you can see there isn't a significant involvement of the university or faculty from the university in this activity. The Right to Information Bill, which is quite significant, it has been discussed for a very long time, based on the idea that citizens and their representatives in the form of the media have a right to get more information from government. Government would then become more transparent and more responsive to the public, and more there'll be less room for corruption. Bills were prepared both in 2003 and 2010, didn't get through. In 2010 or 2011, there was also a private members bill, which was a resurrection of the 2003 bill. In 2011, I was involved in a municipal election, the Colombo Municipal Council election, as a policy advisor, and we included it as it was also included in the Kotte Sri Jayawardenepura election by the UNP, and there was significant debate and discussion during that period. There doesn't seem to be much public discussion today, to a certain extent, because the other bigger issues have kind of pushed it off the pages. But there have been a few articles that I mentioned here by Vijayananda Jaivira from UNESCO, who used to be at UNESCO, Kishali Pinto Jayawardena, who's a legal commentator, and a draft has been available on the web, but I found to my surprise that a lot of people don't even know that it exists. It will be useful. I've asked Mr. Parnavitana, who's the Secretary of the Ministry, to see whether there were any submissions from university academics, but it's not always easy to get responses in time from ministry secretaries. So let's look at the third issue, which is economic policy. I've just included the first few paragraphs of this article that is on the screen. This is about SEPA. I think this was one of the hottest debates that I have been involved in. I've been called various names. I think they even put up my list name on a PowerPoint saying that I'm a traitor for arguing that we do need a legal agreement on managing our economic relations with India. But the important thing is that we really took economic issues into the Sinhala and Tamil media, where generally there has been a fixation on political gossip, so to speak, not even political analysis, but mostly political gossip. And there's this idea that the readership in the Sinhala media, which is what I know about, this is where I engage, isn't very interested in economic issues. That's the general perception. Only the English speaking people are interested in economic issues. But here we broke through, and there were live talk shows both on radio and TV, and there's quite a bit of coverage in the leading newspapers. So I would argue, I mean, anybody who's studied economics knows that trade theory is extraordinarily important. After all, David Ricardo made his name on international economic theory, comparative advantage, and so on. So this is one of the most important issues, particularly for a highly globalized small economy like ours. but who was playing. And you will see this in this month because this debate has restarted. Basically, just a few industrialists who are speaking from emotion and not always with correct facts. And myself, of course, in my case, I always give correct facts. I'm kidding. Dr. Sirimala Aberatna is the only one I can recall in this entire period who had some role in this debate, though I would say, as a good friend, I would say it was a minor role rather than a major role. The Sri Lanka Economics Association was silent. The leading economics think tank, which usually talks about trade matters, suddenly went completely cold when the debate hotted up. The other economics think tank in Sri Lanka, which is the Center for Poverty Analysis, never participated. So let's look at economic policy in general, because this is what I'm really interested in, not the political stuff. IPS, that is the Institute of Policy Studies, has had a blog for the last 3-4 years. They've got some external assistance to do that. But it seems to be not a blog that is kind of responsive to the issues of our time, but one where they put things when their research is completed, a supply side driven blog. Pathfinder Foundation, which is another think tank, keeps up a steady stream of topical, that is, they try to be responsive, they think what the issues are. So for example, there was an issue on the port city yesterday. Economic flashes, which are published in the conventional mainstream media and are also communicated through social media. And they're the only people who are talking about the most important thing, which is economic relations with China. As this shows, a very significant analysis of our relations, economic relations with China. Everybody else is silent, including me. I find myself guilty on this count. So the provisional assessment, which I believe I can be corrected on, is that social scientists and scholars in the humanities and law have made only very marginal contributions to these contemporary and I would say indisputably significant policy debates of our time. Think tanks, I would say, again not unbiasedly, that we have made a significant contribution, including Obesekara, who I barely know. In economic policy debates, the principal think tanks, that is IPS and SEPA, I would say have failed. Natural scientists have contributed. It's quite an interesting issue in Sri Lanka that I've been observing even in terms of social science publications, that it's people with natural science or engineering or medical backgrounds who publish even in the social science journals internationally from Sri Lanka. I'm discounting some of these other pure opinion pieces that we find. And I do concede that I may have missed, and I'm sure to have missed, some behind the scenes contributions, because when it comes to policy issues, we have to understand that behind the scenes is important, and behind the scenes is by definition unknowable. Now, with regard to natural science, engineering, and medicine, clearly there are very significant contributions. I think most people would have talked about, would have seen Professor Amal Kumarage's contribution on benchmarking the costs of highways, which made a very significant impact on the last election. And Professor Oliver Ileperuma can always be trusted to come up with some evidence-based contribution to anything that involves chemistry, as can Upali Samarajiva, formerly with the University of Peradeniya. So I would say, leaving aside the natural science people, university-based scholarship in my area, which is social science, humanities and law, has had very little direct influence on policy in Sri Lanka. Now let's look at the more complex and perhaps more significant areas of getting the decision makers to ask different questions and expanding the policy capacities of the decision makers. I go back to 1936. I think the name James Keynes is not something that needs a lot of introduction. One of the most significant, basically he invented macroeconomics. But in a book entitled General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, which is a very arcane book on economics, he had this to say: the ideas of economists and political philosophers, both when they are right and when they are wrong, are more powerful than is commonly understood. Indeed, the world is ruled by little else. Practical men, that is, the policymakers, the politicians, who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influences, are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. Madmen in authority, who hear voices in the air, I think he's referring to Hitler at this point, are distilling their frenzy from some academic scribbler a few years back. Right? The most important thing for our purposes is this part of the quotation that I have highlighted. In the field of economic and political philosophy, there are not many who are influenced by new theories after they are 25 or 30 years of age. So that the ideas which civil servants and politicians and even agitators apply to current events are not likely to be the newest. So that means that if we want to figure out, according to Keynes, the significant ideas that are at play today, these are the ideas that were there when the current ministers and the current civil society leaders were in university in the 70s and the 80s, in university, right? Or in law college. They learned anything there, right? So that's a tremendous opportunity for the universities, and it's an opportunity. It's an avenue that I, who's run a think tank now, I don't have anymore, right? So that's why I'm always envious about being back in the university, but most of the time I'm not. So I was teaching in an MBA course offered by, so I tried to use it, let's say, right? But my conclusion, based on my anecdotal research, we could say, is that the universities do not use this well. So when I was teaching, I found that, I gave these people readings. Absolutely no one was doing it. I mean, one guy used to come a little early and sit under a tree. I was teaching at Slida, in his car, and he would try to read just before, like in the last half an hour. But other than that, nobody was doing the reading. They just relied on whatever was going on in class. I think any university professor in any country is familiar with this particular complaint. So I never have believed that what goes on in class constitutes the totality of education. I have been against that, right? So what I did is, I did a back of the envelope calculation, budgeted. It's a time use study. It's a very common thing. If done, and many people do it systematically. I did it unsystematically. You argue that these are all people who are taking jobs. So 40 hours for the job. In many cases, we know that if you are doing an MBA, you are not actually at that level. You're probably doing more than 40 hours. But let's say 40 hours. Let's give these people, X number of hours, 56 hours for sleep. Let's give them 2 hours for travel, and so on. You keep adding these things. I have the calculation somewhere, right? Which I then shared with the people who were running the course, the university administrators. Then I found that they absolutely don't have any time, because they were being asked to give 12 hours for the course, right? Anybody who does executive education in Sri Lanka, I would say, would know what I'm talking about, right? So how on earth were these people? I mean, we have to go to Danageval, weddings, etc. I didn't allow anything for any of those, right? I didn't allow any time for talking to the children. These were people with families. Without that, they had no time. So either they were goofing off on the job, or they were not sleeping, or they were something. There really wasn't enough time, and time is a finite quantity in a week, right? So I told the university, I said, guys, can you cut down on the number of hours so that I can get them to do some reading, right? Oh, no, we can't do that, right? So this would be interesting. I'm still intrigued by this, and it would be interesting to do a time use study. Now with Facebook and all this stuff, they must be spending more time on that stuff and doing less reading. However, So I kept teaching. I kept reducing the amount of reading that I expected, and I expected them to read nothing. But I kept giving them assignments that required reading. And what I found was that real learning occurred when they were working on their projects or their theses. There they had to read, they had to deal with the literature, they had to deal with real world problems, and I was actually quite pleased by the quality of what I got from the few students. Now I had a big class and then I took 2 a year to supervise. I was quite pleased by the results that I got at that stage. So my conclusion from this, and again, I mean, this is something I thought I'll talk about from my own experience, but in actual fact, we could say that there's a lot of evidence for this, for what I'm saying in the education literature, right? That it's active learning that actually results in new ideas being absorbed rather than passively listening in lecture theatres. So my argument is that the universities should change their model of learning, reduce fixation on time spent at lectures and the requirements for various kinds of rigid exam formats. But this is where the universities, particularly in these courses, are not willing to budge, because they believe that this is how you achieve quality. I say, maybe it's a bit of an inferiority complex, we are not good enough, or there's a problem with the faculty that they have hired in the first place, and the only way they can get the poor quality faculty that they have hired to perform is to put them into very rigid formats and not give them the flexibility of, because you see, if the student is reading on his own, how are you monitoring it? I could suggest some ways in which it could be monitored, which is go to the MOOCs model and then you can actually see which pages the student has looked at. And anyway, to move it over to problem-based learning. I was just recently in Taipei, and they are really pushing on problem-based education in all subjects, right? Even in the sciences, even in engineering, they are focusing it on problem-based education rather than this regurgitation of theory. So if you do that, my argument is that even the scribblings of a few years back or whatever theories that the faculty are propounding will be absorbed because the students are engaged in active learning. If they do that, their ability to ask different questions or broaden policy horizons will be much bigger. And their policy capacities, when they go into decision-making roles, either in the public sector or in the private sector, will be much better, because now they have learned something other than regurgitation of whatever lecture notes they were listening to. What this would result in is that even the undergraduate students would be engaged with real world problems. I do take a few interns at my organization, and I believe, I have no evidence to prove this, that in fact it contributes a lot to their learning in economics, that dealing with real problems like we do, rather than just plain theory in the university. And this would give a good base of knowledge for the faculty members, who would then be able to influence policy whenever the policy windows or opportunities open up. Because you see, this policy window idea, which is like now the best example, this 100 days, we couldn't predict 2 years ago or 1 year ago or even 6 months ago that this would open up. So if somebody was saying, oh my goodness, there's a need for knowledge, and I'm going to study election systems in New Zealand, Germany, etc., and I'm going to do all that in these 3 months, that's not going to work. You need to have some background to be able to make that impact. So let's now look at the university in the abstract, not in our context. One of the issues is that taking evidence to policy is not a nice, peaceful, neutral activity. When I was an expert witness in some cases, no, not an expert witness in a case, but I went to the state legislature in Ohio, and I made a submission about something the telephone companies were doing. They came running to my university and said, "Who's that fellow who's speaking against us?" And one of them actually had said that they're going to deport me. So I laughed and I said, across the Ohio River, because this company was operating only in that area. They were not operating all over the United States. And I know that no company can ever deport me, right? Even though I was on not a citizen. But and they withheld about multiple millions of dollars from the university because of my behavior for about 2 years. So, I mean, this is tough stuff. This is street fighting, right? So you need to know what you're getting into when you do this. So, and you can see from the failure of IPS, which is a government and internationally supported policy think tank, when the issue got really hot, when scientific evidence, when informed economic thinking was most important, they got scared and they pulled out, because particularly the opponents were quite virulent and unpleasant in the way they attacked people, and I was personally attacked, as I said. They pulled out because they couldn't afford to take that risk. So my argument is that universities should not seek to influence policy as universities. A university has no business, in my opinion, even to say, give us more money, right? Maybe that's all the university can say, right? Give us more money, and we'll see it as self-interested pleading, right? But a university could create an environment within which individual faculty members can speak their minds. And when somebody comes and says, that fellow is arguing against us, that fellow is controversial, you say, yeah, that's what the university is about. Like my university president said, yeah, sure. You want to give me some more money so that I'll get a fellow who will argue against him? I'll give you a seat on the selection committee so that you can get somebody who will support your position. But he's mine, and he's got the freedom to speak, right? So that's what a university is about. Can Sri Lankan universities create such an environment? Some American, well-endowed American and other universities have done so. I would speak from personal experience. Can we do that, right? I would argue that we have extraordinary demands on the teaching side, way more than I spent on teaching. Here, class time is very high. I have done this only with regard to India. I don't know what the exact time allocations here in Sri Lanka are, but in India it's 14 to 16 hours a week, and that's I don't think it should be very different in Sri Lanka, right? So again, it's this fixation. We have this idea in the US that if you spend 1 hour in a class, there's prep time and there's interaction with students and there's assessment, and that actually is about 5 hours, right? It's not 1 hour. So that is where my thinking comes, which is I don't like only doing things in class, because I think this is the tip of the iceberg. But here, I think we don't think that anything goes on outside, because if we do that, there won't be any. Those people are now working 40 hours a day or 50 hours a week or whatever. So there isn't much time for other things. Now I know that even in your lecture series, you had somebody come and tell people about international peer-reviewed journals. I've set up some of these journals. I publish in them, but I don't think they have much use, right? I mean, their primary purpose is not to inform the world, but it is to give credibility to the academics. That is, how do you know who's a good academic? Because they've got citations, right? Not because they got, now no longer are we talking about publications, but we now talk about publications where and how many citations, right? So I think that this drives us in a certain direction, which is not policy relevance. This drives us to impress our colleagues, because that's how you get published in peer-reviewed journals. Even 2 days ago, I was doing a anonymous review for a journal submission, and the guy impresses me, he gets published. He doesn't impress me, he doesn't get published. So I'm the man. So he's got to impress me, not government policymaker, right? And then I would argue that this is one of the very few talks that I have given which is 1 hour long. I was very surprised because I'm usually given 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, right? And we are used to getting the point across in 15, 20 minutes, people like us who play in the policy arena. But university academics usually get a captive audience, and they get a long period of time, and they usually speak in the monotone. Usually, exceptions exist, I admit. But this is not the ideal training, not the ideal practice for communicating with the media. Academics, even in the US, used to complain to me, what is this, Rohan? They want us to speak in sound bites. We don't speak in sound bites. But hey, the reality is that there's TV news and they can give you at most 2 minutes. On a good day, really good day, you get 2 minutes. Most of the time, you get 45 seconds. You better get your point across in 45 seconds. That's called a sound bite. Get used to it, right? So, is this a problem limited to our countries? I argue not. My PhD is from Canada. Most of my current funding comes from the government of Canada. I have great affection for Canada. But look at this. I'm taking a case of a telecom policy review in Canada. And the bottom line of some people who analyzed the data, which I was trying to do with Karu Parnavitana and trying to analyze where the submissions for the Right to Information bill came in, 4.5% of the submissions came from people associated with universities. 4.5%, right, which is negligible. So now from this we can conclude that there's a structural problem here. This is not that our people are weak, our people have got additional problems from the Canadians and the Americans, but there's a structural problem about the universities or people in the universities contributing to the policy process. So this has been recognized. They have set up these information broker units, right? So here's one example, LSE. They have set up this unit inside the university, something called the Public Policy Group, where they will talk to the faculty members, they will assess their communication capabilities, and if their communication capabilities are not very good, they will communicate on their behalf. They will get the very densely written scientific information into usable form for the policy arena and push the information out, or be responsive when the calls come in, right? Or we could think of equivalent things completely outside the university, which is the think tanks, like mine. In my organization, we do have peer-reviewed journal publication, but that's not a high priority. It's a lower priority. Our primary KPIs, our primary performance indicators are how do we change policy? How many policy decision makers do we communicate to? That's what we measure people in the annual reviews by, not on how many publications they got. That's a secondary thing. Did you build your profile? Did you make yourself more marketable, etc.? We have other indicators for that. So they are focused on this question, most think tanks. Some of them get lost, and they try to become, generators of peer-reviewed journal articles. Some in Sri Lanka have done that too. They have focus. They don't do everything under the sun. The university generally is very broad. They attract certain kinds of people, right? But they do have some problems. Sometimes people question their legitimacy, you could say. Universities have a sort of inherent legitimacy. Deservedly or not, people think universities are independent, and that the people in the universities know what they're talking about, and so on. These are all assumptions. I don't think any of these assumptions are proven, but they are taken as assumptions, right? Some of these places, like the IPS, don't have the required independence to actually play an active role in policy. And all of us have a problem because we have to retrain the people that we hire because the universities are not giving us people who are really equipped to be relevant. So my final section is an initiative. You could say it's almost an action research project. It's influenced by a lot of things I've been involved in throughout my life in the United States and in Europe. And here, what I tried to do was to operationalize it in a way through this entity called Communication Policy Research South. So funders at that point, in 2006, were quite interested in capacity building. So for most people, capacity building is, running a bunch of training courses, which I think is I do them, but most training courses are a waste of time, both of the participants and of the person who's doing the training. So I said, why don't I do this? And they accepted this idea. And what we are basically doing is, there's a centerpiece, which is a training course, but as I go through, a conference, and a little bit of training, what you call tutorials. But as I go through, I think you'll get a sense of what we are doing. What we try to do is that we identify motivated and mid-level individuals within and without the iron triangles of policy. Now, I'm sorry, I don't, well, we could talk about it. Generally, you say in policy there are these different interest groups that sort of lock things in place. You take education reforms in Sri Lanka, it will be the teachers, the parents, and the administrators. They'll lock it in place so that actually everybody knows reforms need to be done, but they don't get done. So what we are trying to do is get people outside this system, so even from inside the system, but we take individuals. We don't deal with institutions. We don't write to the dean and say, please nominate somebody who is interested in policy. We say, let these people apply. So the dean can say, you apply. But that person has got to make it on their merits. That is a very double-blind, refereed process. Is this a policy relevant abstract? We shortlist them, give them a month or two, complete the paper. We have a ranking system. Is this good research? Is it policy relevant? Etc., etc., etc. Judged by senior scholars who have involvement in the policy space, and we bring them in. We have a different category called young scholars, where we take a small number of people who are not quite ready to do the papers, generally from the weaker countries, Bhutan, Nepal, and places like that. And we let them listen to the presentations that are going on at the conference, but we also give them some extra days of training on how to communicate, how to put ideas together, on research methods and things of that nature. So the whole idea is to improve their skills and also motivation. Motivation comes from the fact that they are with a community of sort of policy interested people. And we have some presentations by what we'd call policy heroes, people who've actually made a big impact on policy change and so on. So they get a little bit of that motivation side as well. And luckily, these days, these people like to interact with each other on Facebook and various other things. So we maintain a virtual community where they share ideas with each other, etc., etc. So how will this happen? These people, without any direction from us, they will take research to policy as public interest advocates, as consultants to various stakeholders, through the media. I will just illustrate this as I'm wrapping up. Once they have got a good profile as skilled people who can mobilize social science in the interests of policy, hopefully they'll get hired, promoted, etc. So we're a sort of open source organization. We take all these papers and whatever they allow us to publish, some of them want to get it published in formal journals, so they don't permit us. So that is what that line going up and down is. Some years it's fewer papers that go up. we put it on SSRN, which is a open platform, Social Science Research Network, and we can see what the downloads and the views are. The yellow is the download. And as you can see, if it has been there for a longer time, the downloads are a little higher because they have had more time to be caught. That's per paper. And every year we do a survey. Our response rate is not the greatest. Now we are down to about 19%. So our argument is that, the rest of them really haven't done anything much. That's why they're not responding, right? So 19% of them are active, and this is the kind of things that they're active in: policy papers, briefs, interviews to the media, policy memos, participation in blogs, etc., etc. Different kinds of taking evidence to the policy process. Are they quiet and inactive on the academic side? No. They've got journal publications, theses, proposals, research projects in progress, and so on. Theses, grant proposals. Well, only 20% of them. You're spending all this money, you're putting all this effort, you're taking Canadian taxpayers' money and you're doing this. They're young, right? And that's why I always tell these people, when I hear people complaining about it, generally they are my age, and I say, what were you doing when you were 29 years old? How much policy impact did you have? How many publications did you have when you were 29 years old, right? These are young people. It's a young group. And it takes time for them to mature and get in the game. Not too many of them have PhDs. We are dealing with Asia, right? So only about 33 of them, 1 in 3 of the paper givers, that's the people who have made through the double-blind process, have PhDs, though we are very good on representing women, much better than most organizations that I work with. So I'll conclude with these two stories. Now, Grace Mirandilla Santos she had a bachelor's degree when she started interacting with us. And then she obtained a master's in public policy within the context of a 10-year engagement with us. She first started being in touch with us, I think here, from even before 2007. So she's come as a young scholar, that is without giving a paper, got through the training, listened to what other people were doing. 3 years in a row, she then submitted papers, got through the process, which is only about 25-28% of these people make it. Not everybody gets to come, right? 1 in 4, 1 in 5. And has been very active, writing online and so on. And you can see here, I gave the most recent things, which is she's now a major resource for the government of Philippines, where they're having hearings and so on about how to measure broadband quality, and the work that she's taking to them is having quite an impact. He's a different kind of guy, Indonesian, with first degree or master's in economics from Indonesia when he started interacting with us. Got his PhD at Chalmers in Sweden in 2008. I think that's around when he was as a PhD student that he came into our system. And he has, as a result, leveraged it to get postdoctoral positions, and I could even argue that his current job is because of interactions he had at the conference, because we had some EU people who participated as referees and so on. So he writes with others, taking evidence to bear on affordability of technology and various things in newspapers in his country. He is not back in Indonesia yet. So he was in Sweden, now he's in Spain, working for a EU research center. But he's making an impact in Indonesia. So I'll just skip through these. Basically, the thesis here is that not everybody in the university is cut out to be or should be a contributor to policy processes, but some should be, right? Not everybody should be, but some should be. The university should allow those people to do that. Let some people be very abstract. Let some people be very good teachers. Let some people engage with the policy process, right? That's what the university should do. What we believe, that if we can have networks like this, and if we do this at a national level, they can be quite effective in terms of costs, because you don't have to put people on aircraft and put them in hotels. You can do it closer to home and keep the costs down. Let this like-minded people, because there will be a minority in each university, there will be pretty much everybody in think tanks would be interested, but create a learning platform where they can interact with each other, support each other, learn from each other, and we can put some contributions into that. Those senior people who are good at taking research to policy. If we do that, we will have not only contributions to the policy process, because we now have policy-oriented faculty within universities, but we will also improve the ability to produce better graduates who are equipped to deal with real-world problems, who have actually internalized theory better rather than prepared for exams, and who can I have a self-interested claim here. I'll be able to have better recruits that I don't have to retrain from scratch. So that is my argument. I think it is an argument more than a scientifically based assertion. There's some evidence here, but not all of it is as systematic as I would like it to be. But I think it's something worth thinking about. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Speech on, and I think in order to make it more relevant, I think we'll have to have a small discussion on this. So basically, your topic was making the university relevant. It actually, in other way, it might seem that it is irrelevant now. What can you say about that?
That it is irrelevant.
Yes, because if it is not relevant, then it's irrelevant.
Well, its relevance in a policy context to the great policy questions of our time.
Right.
And I began, remember, I supported myself with two authorities. The Indian Prime Minister is saying he is not getting enough input, contribution of ideas, either from the universities or from the think tanks.
Yes.
And Nicholas Kristof, who's a very well-respected columnist for the New York Times, is saying, professors, we need you. That's the title of his column. Professors, we need you. You're there, but you're not really contributing here, right?
Right.
So all the big policy debates are being played out by people who are not really on top of the evidence.
Right. They're not the academics or the intellectuals who are supposed to be.
So we are irrelevant. Yes.
Right. Actually, now, then come to the second point that I would like to raise with you. You were actually concentrating on policy. Mm-hmm. Now, okay, policy is very important to a country and development. But is it the only function that an academics or universities should be involved in? Is it only policy or substantially policy or other things?
It's a good question. Generally speaking, when we speak of the university, we think it has three functions: to generate new knowledge, that's a research function.
That's correct, yes.
To teach, that is to educate the next generation. And in the US we used to call it service, but it's this external engagement, right? So to say that when I focus on policy, does it mean that I think the university should become 100% oriented to service? No, right? Mm-hmm. So the university must continue with its 3 missions, 3 things that it does.
Yes.
Right? So it's quite possible that the universities are doing an extraordinarily effective job in research, generation of new knowledge, abstract knowledge.
Yes.
And when we talk about it, we sometimes say, some of the knowledge that we produce should be useless.
That also could be correct, yes.
Yeah, mathematics, certain areas of astrophysics, etc., etc. Right? There's no sort of immediate practical application that we can think about it, but we all have agreed that this is very useful. I used to tell my students about this. The architecture of a university sometimes tells you a story. My university, which was a land-grant university, started in the 19th century. The middle of the university, the heart of the university, I used to say, is full of the useless subjects. Because they are the most important subjects. History, English, geology exception, but history, English, these are the guys who are around the quadrangle, right? As you go further and further away from the quadrangle, from the heart of the university, you get the engineering schools, the medical, the agriculture faculty, etc., are outside.
Okay.
Because in a way, that's the architecture. This is the abstract knowledge, is the core of the university. So I'm not disputing that, right? I'm saying, however, some of us must engage with the critical policy debates of our time. Some of us.
Okay.
We must make a contribution, right? In the same way, I don't think all faculty members are engaged in superb research either.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
They're not.
So, and teaching, we could debate this endlessly, but I would argue that most university faculty do a very poor job of teaching, right?
That might be.
Right? So we have to do all 3. I'm saying don't abandon one field.
Okay.
I'm pointing to a field that is more or less abandoned, and I'm saying how can we improve in that area. I'm not saying give up on the other 2. Keep the other 2. Actually, my argument is if you do this, even your teaching will improve. Just to give a concrete example, in the US, they assess your teaching, in a ministry, every quarter, every few weeks you get assessed, right? And I noticed that I was slightly above average, and I would always get a little sheet which said, how am I in relation to in my own unit,
okay.
in my college, that is my faculty, and across the university. I used to be just above average. But after I came to Sri Lanka and I was engaged in the policy process and I went back and I was teaching for 1 year, my performance ratings went way up. I went into the top tier.
Okay.
Because I had been there. I was a guy who was teaching policy. I had been in policy. And I knew.
Exposed to the
real world.
Facts, yes.
Right? So I think your teaching will improve. I would even argue your research will improve.
Okay. So now I'll come to a sort of a personal issue. Personal issue means actually I'm from a faculty of engineering.
Yeah.
So now we engineers do believe that we are not very much involved in policy. That is left for the lawyers or the social scientists. So as engineers, we fiddle with the nuts and bolts. So what have you got to say about that,
Hell, Professor Amal Kumaria is a classic example, right?
Yeah.
He didn't say, I believe, I think, this is my personal opinion. He assembled evidence. And I know this is one example that everybody knows about, but throughout his career, I have interacted with a long time, because I was in government and he was giving us advice.
Yes.
He deeply cares about traffic and congestion and the fact that we are neglecting public transport and so on. Yes. What he's doing is he's bringing evidence to we are not interested in Amal's opinion.
Yes.
We are interested in the evidence that he can bring to us. I'm now putting my old hat as being inside government.
Right.
So I think irrigation engineers, civil engineers in particular, that's an area that I've had a lot of interactions with. Correct. We have all these issues about dam safety, we've had issues about wastage of water, the inefficient way in which we use irrigation water. There's a whole series of policy issues there. We don't want social scientists coming and telling us about it. We need good engineers telling us in ways that policymakers can understand how we should manage this water resource, right? In the engineering field, we have the same story, right? All these debates about non-renewables and renewables and so on. I do need the economists, but then economists aren't enough.
Right.
I need the electrical engineers at the table, and I don't have enough of them. There are some very good ones. I mean, Ranjit Siamalapitia, Dr. Siamalapitia is a great guy, a great asset to the sector in this country, right? There are good, believe me, I think the engineers are making a better contribution than people in the social sciences.
Yes.
Period. Right?
I'm glad to hear about it.
Yes, but they could do better.
That's the thing. Yeah. So actually, our people, or engineers, or the scientists means the natural scientists.
Yeah.
They also have to come out of this shell. They normally do build up a shell around them. And engineers, since we have to be little bit more interactive with the public, so we are a little bit out of the shell. But actually, you answered my question as well as my point was made by you finally, the point I wanted to make, that we should be involved in policy. Yeah. And as most of the new world things are technical, so the technical input is very important.
I mean, there are, believe me, I have interacted with some engineers who think that only engineers should be involved in policy. I disagree with that.
Yeah,
I think, you need multidisciplinary teams, you need engineers, you need good lawyers, you need good economists, at least in my areas. I'm a person who deals with infrastructure, right? Roads, transport, water, electricity,
IT,
telecom. I need all of them, right? But I need all three. I don't want any group to be not represented.
Right. So, Professor Samarajiva, I think we had a long and interesting discussion, and I think it's about time. So I would like to thank you very much on behalf of our university as well as this program. I'll be very interested to meet you again one more time sometime. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Well, that was quite interesting. Actually, the discussion and the sound bites thrown during the past 10 minutes, I think, caught my ear more than the 1 hour of lecture. I see what you mean. Thank you very much, Professor Rohan Samarajiva, for coming to OUSL today and for sharing your thoughts on national policy as well as making the university relevant. And I must also thank Professor Pallevatta for initiating a very interesting discussion, which is, which really put things into perspective for our audience, I'm sure. I must also take this opportunity to thank the Centre for Educational Technology and Media, CETME, of the Open University of Sri Lanka, without which we won't be able to live broadcast this particular lecture series. Furthermore, the recording of this particular lecture will be available on YouTube, hopefully by this evening. So again, on behalf of the Open University of Sri Lanka, thank you very much to our distinguished speaker as well as our chair, and have a good day.